So we're going to be talking about the special problem of communication and emotionality between men and women. So you remember last time we were talking about males and females, so we're going to continue with that. So in general, and again, it might have changed in a small percentage, but I still think I'm going to stick to her text. Men are socialized not to express their emotions freely or to value emotional expression as much as women. Men tend to see the exchange of information as more important than contact communication. That is, words of endearment, sympathy, and support. And I still see this in my practice all the time, where the wives want support and he's trying to fix the problem or not getting why we need to discuss it again. Didn't we discuss this last week? Isn't it over yet? Whereas we want support and we want validation. To help bridge this gap, it's important to let your spouse know what pleases or displeases you without temper. If the gap in communication styles is very great, it's wise to see a counselor. The lack of an emotionally fulfilling relationship is profoundly painful to a very feeling individual. So the idea is, if you do want your needs to be met, the better you communicate them, the calmer. You kind of role model that. If you calm and you de-escalate situations and you wait for the timing to be right, it's more likely that you'll be heard. If you just blare or you attack or you do it at the wrong time, you're less likely to be heard. So it can be a bit difficult sometimes to manage, you'll need to do it right now and to get it the way you want it, but communication is all about doing it in the best possible way to be heard. But if your spouse is someone who's very different to you, is not very good at emotions, that can be a very hard thing to change. It can be changed. If a person is willing, they can change most things, but if not, often just talking about it isn't the way that it's going to get fixed. So it can be quite a hard thing in marriages, this difference in emotionality. It can go the other way as well. I'm talking about it because it's all women here, but it can be the other way as well. There are men who are more emotional and find their wives are less emotional, and the same frustration exists. So avoid maximizing, saying it's awful. When we are in temper, we tend to maximize our own pain and minimize the pain of others. The tendency to complain and to exaggerate, what she calls awfulize, to exaggerate mundane frustrations and discomforts, has a number of negative side effects. It makes you think that you don't have the self-control or capacity to cope adequately with the task, which you really do have. And I must say, especially with the war going on more and more, it's reminding me just how is it really a big problem? And this is not a life-threatening measure, but actually every little thing we exaggerate the discomfort. One of the downsides she's saying is that if you go, oh, it's so big, I don't know what's going to happen, we don't have the accommodation we wanted. We're talking earlier about this. They booked into a hotel and they were expecting a sea view and it was a mountain view and they called in the manager and it was a whole big thing, right? And I'm not judging it, but if you are doing that and you're awfulizing how terrible it is that you're in a 5-star hotel and you haven't got a sea view, you're telling yourself, this is so bad, how am I going to cope with it? You're giving yourself that message.
Is this the same as catastrophizing? Does it mean the same thing?
Awfulizing, yes, it's similar. So catastrophizing is when you go, I'm going to die. If I don't get a sea view, it's going to lead to my demise. This is just going, it's really much more awful than it really is, but it isn't that it's a catastrophe. So, but when you use this language, you start making it harder for yourself to cope. Whereas when you go, it's a beautiful hotel room, and it's going to be comfortable, and I can still have a great holiday. I can cope with it. You will be more resilient. Doesn't mean you want it or it's the most ideal thing, but you will feel better. You'll be more resilient. It also makes other people think you don't have that ability. Oh, I can't manage all of this. And it makes things look more complicated or uncomfortable than they are, so that they really do become a burden. So I have a patient, and actually I can smile now. I haven't thought about them for a long time, but whenever they go on holiday, the husband predicts they sometimes move hotels 3 times. They're very wealthy and they can stay anywhere, and they'll go wherever in Italy, I don't know where, and he will say this, and they'll book in somewhere and they'll eventually move at least twice more to get the right hotel room that they want. So So he doesn't think his wife can cope with all these things, right? Because everything's so awful. He spends a lot of his time worrying about holidays and when they're going to find the right room. So the loss of trust in yourself and of others' trust in you lowers your self-esteem and harms relationships. If everything you're saying is awful and you can't bear the discomfort, you will not trust yourself to cope. And people around you will think, she's precious, she needs extra help. We've got to be very careful that everything's just the right temperature. You create this vibe around yourself. Others may not tell you what you need to know. Many children who have awfulising parents withhold necessary information for them for fear that, and how they're using catastrophic, Dad will have a heart attack. But I have a lot of patients who say, I would never tell my mother that because she'll worry. So they don't tell their parents, and I'm talking about this one woman, I think that she's not young, but she's like in her 40s, and something will happen and she'll say, no, if I tell my mother, then I know my mother won't sleep all night. So if you're one of these people that everything you awfulise, people won't share with you because they don't want you to worry. They don't think you're going to have a heart attack, but they think you're not going to worry. So these are all the consequences of awfulising. So you distance yourself from others with such awfulising. And furthermore, you may come to believe that things really are awful and thus overprotect and stifle others so that they do not develop self-trust and self-confidence. So if you are telling the people around you this is terrible, that the air conditioner is not working, or whatever it is, the hotel room isn't okay, then the people around you also then become overprotected or very critical of things and less resilient. If you awfulise rejection, you may become excessively permissive, giving in to others' demands out of fear of how awful it would be if they rejected you. So this is an interesting thing, like the example you brought, that if you go, I'm going to stand up for myself, and you go, you placate people because you're scared they're going to reject you. If you stand up for yourself, then what happens is you actually become very placating and permissive. So we're so scared of, again, I have a lot of people who go, I hate confrontation, so I'll just say yes. I don't want that person not to like me, so I'll include them even though I don't really want them. And you become a doormat because you're so scared of rejection. You think rejection is going to be so terrible, I can't cope with it. I can't bear the discomfort. And therefore, often you feel people are taking advantage of you, or you're very uncomfortable. So yes, it is uncomfortable to be rejected. It is uncomfortable to have conflict. It is uncomfortable when people disagree with you, but you stand your ground. But don't awfulise it. We say comfort is a want, not a need, and disapproval is not disastrous. And I like that one. It's nice if everyone approves of me, but if they don't, it's not disastrous. And it's not even awful, just a bit uncomfortable, and I can bear the discomfort. So otherwise you can see all the consequences when everything is blown up in your mind to being awful, when really it's just uncomfortable. That's back to dishes. I used to awfulise doing the dishes. I'd be tense and self-pitying about all the housework I had to do. Finally, I decided to change my attitude. I decided to be grateful for the fact that we have dishes and good food to eat. I put on music in the kitchen or would sing to myself. Without a word to my children, they began to help more on their own instead of always trying to find excuses to get out of it. And my husband even started coming in to chat or help me out. I was amazed at how my changed attitude affected the whole family without my saying a word. So especially if it's something you have to do every day or it's a normal, it's people do it and just get on with it. It affects everyone in a negative way. If you're complaining about, oh, this is terrible, it has a negative ripple effect. It is usually a mistake to tell others they are awfulizing. So if someone comes and says, oh, I didn't like my hotel room, and you go, no, you're awfulizing, it's not a good idea. Remember, everyone needs to work things out for themselves. They might not have told you the whole truth and are really facing a serious problem. So that's an interesting one. It used to be more in the old days, where in one particular patient I had, and I didn't realize, and it was before we spoke about domestic violence. I'm talking about really a long time ago, 40 years ago. And her husband was actually being violent, but the shame, she never told me and I never picked it up. Until one day she said, "Didn't you work it out? Don't you know?" And I said, "Honestly, I didn't." And it wasn't even in my front of my mind that someone in that couple, the nice Jewish South African couple, that this was going on. So sometimes, you think someone's exaggerating, but really there's more of a story. Or often with children, this has also become quite a problem now, where kids hit their parents, but they don't want to tell anybody. So the parents protect it. So there are a few examples. I know of someone whose son pushed her down the stairs and she had a broken shoulder.
Adult children.
Well, I think he's 14, the son, yeah. And so they might go, "Oh, my son is so difficult," and you go, "Oh, there, she's awfulising. All teenage boys are difficult," but she's not actually telling you that she had to have shoulder surgery because he pushed her down the stairs. So that's why we never say to someone else, "You're awfulising and all boys are difficult," or "all girls are like this." You don't often always know the whole story. You also don't know the depth of someone else's pain. So we all feel pain differently. So one person can go through something and feel it much more intensely than we do. So for us, it might not be so awful. If appropriate, you can ask them to measure the pain. Sometimes they do this with physical pain, where you might say on a scale of 1 to 10, I don't really love that tool. But either way, to empathize. So when your friend comes or your child comes and says it was terrible, the hotel room was awful, you just empathize. You don't tell them it wasn't awful. You don't really know what's going on. And if they're not ready to change, then it's not our job. We all work on ourselves here. Common areas for excessive emotionalism are minor disappointments in relationships, food, money, cleanliness, dress, and social events. Get in touch with your own particular sore spots. So we might all awfulize different things. And so we need to know, I make a fuss about food. If I don't get the food I want when I get there, that's an issue. We were talking the other day about an ex-family member who used to say she had allergies and then would go to the kitchen. Can't remember the context, but we were talking about, but some people are very fussy and they go and they eat out and there isn't the food for them to eat and it's like a big deal. That might be one example, or it might be cleanliness, or it could be your clothing, or it could be you couldn't find anything when you were shopping. Whatever it is, one thing might bother one person. Find your area where you awfulize and where you could use this tool of I can bear the discomfort. It's not the end of the world if I go there and I just have to have a salad. But again, you can never tell someone else what they should be doing. We can only work on ourselves.
It's really hard not to tell someone else because you can go, look at the salad, or you got the wrong hotel room. But surely next time, if you think of it in the way we think of things, we might help that person for the next time.
Yeah, but let's use an example that happened here. And I hope you don't mind that I'm using this example. I'm not going to say names because it's being recorded, but I'm just going to nod in direction of the person that I'm talking to.
I'm writing what you
Okay,
say.
fine. So where the previous examples were given, and we had all said to this particular person, you're really not seeing your neighbor's point of view. Why don't you really realize this and this and this about the dog food? She would not have been ready to hear it. It's taken however many months of a lot of work and coming to Emmett Group that she's got there by herself. So we can tell them. But first of all, it's not our pain. It's not our history. It's not our... So when you're telling it, a person has to come to it themselves. We can role model what we do for ourselves. But even though you're in the group, if we had all at the end of the opposite, and that's why I'm so against advice, right? If we had all said, look, this is what you need to do. Next time someone's dog comes along, just de-escalated, just offer to pay, you would have gone, huh? They're wrong. You weren't ready. And I'm just saying because we all have been there where when someone tells us, but we're not ready and we see it our way. So that's why it doesn't really work. So what is our own sore spot? I can't stand it when someone, this is mine, shows up late. I think
Sorry.
No, I'm not pointing a finger at you. I'm actually thinking of my family members. Actually, the other one is they don't respond to my messages we've spoken, right? Criticizes me, leaves the lights on unnecessarily, use too much hot water. I've got a whole list here. Or I hate the thought of going to the dentist, cleaning, asking for help, not getting enough sleep, etc. So we all have little things that we make it bigger than it is. It doesn't mean it's not a problem that doesn't need to be solutionized. We're not saying be a doormat, but it's going, I don't have to get so worked up about it like it's so terrible if they arrive late. I don't like it, how am I going to fix it or ignore it, but it's without that this is terrible feeling.
That's what I wrote here, just that one sentence you said, I can bear the discomfort.
Yeah.
Because it's not always comfortable how other people
Correct.
are.
Correct.
And if you just say that.
Yeah. It's true.
It'll be a key one for me now.
Good. Don't say I can't stand it when you could substitute I don't want it or like it. Awfulising is a subtle form of self-denigration. You're putting yourself down. I can't manage it, this is terrible, I can't stand it. What you rather go is I don't like it or I don't want it. On the same time, avoid minimising. As frustrating, irrational, and sometimes dangerous as it is to awfulise, the opposite habit is called minimising, and it's equally problematic. Chronic minimisers are apt to say, it's nothing, don't worry, everything will be just fine, just calm down, even before they know what's going on. They may refuse to take the time to examine the realities of the situation. And even when they do know that real pain and hardship are involved, they minimise the difficulty and distress involved, perhaps saying, they can handle it, they deserve it, they're used to suffering, or I can handle it, I'm used to suffering. Minimisers are uncomfortable with feelings. They tend to see the display of emotions as a sign of weakness or impending collapse. Minimising is a positive strategy which is useful for those who over-dramatize. But when this becomes a lifelong compulsive character trait, it prevents the development of truly caring relationships. So someone wants to come and say, I'm sorry you're going through this, and you go, it's nothing. Because we connect on the level of vulnerability. So when you're going through something and someone is there for you, you let somebody in, then you can get close. But if you're trying to reach out to someone and they push you away by going, it's nothing, I'm fine, you can't get close to that person. And you know that feeling when someone says it's nothing, you feel pushed away. Minimisers are uncomfortable feeling, I said that. Minimising is a positive strategy for those who over-dramatize, I said that. It may also cause one to take action when there is a situation that to avoid action, when there's a situation that calls for prompt attention because he feels ashamed or inadequate. So this is something that has come up for me a number of times where I personally, but when someone needs to go to the hospital and they're minimising, and the whole family's saying, I think you're having a heart attack, and they're going, no, it's nothing. And you really do need to call the ambulance or Hatsola. But people might do that in different ways, where they need to call an ambulance, or they need to see the doctor, or they need to do something, and you don't because you're minimising. So it can actually be harmful for you if you're a minimiser. If you're not sure, just ask an expert. Like, do you think I need to go to a doctor or a good friend if you tend to be a minimiser? Because you do need to get things checked out. You do need to look into things. You can't say everything is nothing. So it's finding a balance really of awfulising, but also checking. When I was saying being irresponsible. A parent may not want to face that his child has a real physical or emotional problem because he thinks it implies that he's a failure. So this is a big one. So teachers, in their subtle way, are trying to say you need to go have an assessment so often. And they just go, no, it's nothing. Or I love this one. I don't know if you still have it, but when I used to do assessments, I'd say, look, I think your son needs an assessment. He may have ADHD. And the father goes, I was exactly the same at school. Nothing wrong. I was exactly the same. So that's a big form of minimising. And it's very difficult on the teachers because you've got kids who are, and I'm sure you know about some of this, who are destroying the classrooms and really having meltdowns and need real treatment, and apparently teachers can't actually say that. They can't tell parents you have to go for an assessment, and it's very hard to get through. Others may want to deny the reality of an incompetent teacher, The possibility of financial collapse. This is another big one. Well, I've worked with people where one of the partners, I remember years ago in South Africa, I had a patient who worked on the mines. He had a concession store, but it was going bankrupt. And his wife kept telling him, you need to close it. And he wouldn't. He said, I'm going to die in that shop. I'm not closing it. And they were just not making any money and starting to lose money. And he kept saying it'll get better and it won't, and the stress that it caused her. So often people don't look at their finances and it's getting worse and worse and they're minimizing what's really going on. And then the pain of physical or mental abuse. So often people are in an abusive situation, they don't want to acknowledge it. And they minimize it. So these people are either afraid to face the unknown. So if you acknowledge, let's say you're in an abusive marriage, as an example, then the unknown, what if people do I have to leave? And what will it mean? And I'd rather just stay in the marriage than leave. That's a big part of it. Or what if my son or daughter gets assessed and they are on the spectrum? Then what is that going to mean? So there's an avoidance and a fear of the unknown. There's a fear of the discomforts of change. Change is very uncomfortable. It takes a lot of energy. Or fearful of public censure. People are going to know, or people are going to reject you. So it's much, much better now. But years ago, if people, even told their families, it was like people would have a meeting. When I think about it now, let's say, and it was more boys would be diagnosed with ADHD. Then they would sit the grandparents down and say, look, we're telling you a secret. It's confidential. We're only telling you. Only the teacher and you know. And the fear of if people know my son is being diagnosed, we're going to be rejected, the kids won't play with him, all those fears. So what they do is that's not all that bad and lull themselves into passivity. If you just don't do anything, it'll go away. The lump will go away, the debt will go away, the relationship will get better. So temper, which means it's a temperamental response, could be either way. It doesn't mean you're getting angry. It's a temperamental response, an illogical response to the event. So temper can cause you to minimize or maximize. Either way, it keeps you from reacting appropriately to the situation. So because either you're making it too little, you're not having an objective, when we talk about the midas, we've got things like logic, rationality, objectivity. These are important midot that you need to do when you look at a problem. You need to be logical and rational and take responsibility, all those things. And when you minimize or maximize, you're not actually doing that. There's no logic. It's just a response to avoid what's happening or to overly compensate for something. So it's interesting, and we probably all do both in little ways. There are probably areas in our life where we also minimize, and sometimes we need to think about what those areas are where we actually should be paying attention to something. So think about what should you be paying more attention, and what are you afraid of that you're saying it's not so bad. And often we let relationships go and we don't confront issues as they keep happening instead of nipping it in the bud. So where are we minimizing? And then what we said earlier, and where are we awfulising? And to be more objective with both of them so that we can solve the problem or use an Emma tool to manage it, but not to have an irrational response to it. I'm going to talk a little bit about, because this is a nice closure on this topic, but there was something I was reading earlier that made me just think of a shir I was listening to. And I can't remember what it was that I read, but I'll tell you about it anyway. So Rabbi Garari had a speaker, and she is on the shir. You can listen to it on Bina, but I just want to get her name. So the shir is called A Personal Account of Healing from Trauma with Faith and Resilience with Devori Kreiman. So I was listening to it today, and I wanted to share it with you because I found it really motivating. Talk about, this is not awfulising, you'll hear why I'm saying a really awful situation, to put it mildly. But she gives a very good example. She starts off, she's obviously a grandmother now, and she tells a story about her daughter whose kid he's 5 years old, went to a preschool very close to where they lived, but when he needed to go to primary school, I presume the Chabad school was further away, an hour away, and so she was going to put him onto a bus. And the first day arrived, and she drove him to school, and she told him he's catching the bus, and it was in England actually, and as she was leaving, she thought, you know what, he's only 5. It's the first day, and actually I think I'm going to wait for him, and at the end of the day I'm going to drive him home, and I can ask him how his day went, and it's, you know, just be supportive for him on his first day. And so it was in Stanford Hill. She stayed the whole day. She didn't go drive up and down. She stayed the whole day, and when 4 o'clock came, she went to fetch him, and she said, I'm here, and he started yelling, I want to go on the bus, I want to go on the bus. And whatever she told him, he wouldn't stop screaming. So he got into the car, and the whole way home, they didn't have any good conversation because he was screaming, I want to go on the bus, and I want to go on the bus. And she said, she was talking about herself, she said, you know, she realized that using it as a moshel, that when we want something in our lives, we are so busy, and Hashem gives us something different. We thought we were going to go on the bus, and then we don't go on the bus. But we really wanted to go on the bus. But then we spend so much time yelling and screaming that we want to be on the bus, that we're not actually able to maximize the alternative that Hashem is giving us. Because if her little boy had just calmed down, they would have had a very meaningful hour's drive back where they would have connected, and he would have got support at the end of his first day at school. But because he's a child, he didn't understand what his mother was offering. He didn't understand the sacrifice his mother had made, staying the whole day waiting for him to finish school. All he could think about was he wanted to be on the bus. So this is a moshel that we don't understand Hashem's ways, and we think life should be like this. And if we can just stop the screaming and go, okay, so you didn't want us to go on the bus, then we have a better chance of maximizing our relationship with Hashem and what we're meant to be actually going through. So I thought it was a beautiful, beautiful analogy. So, what is her story? And again, I'd recommend you listen to it because she is so strong. She had 8 children, and 4 of them were born with the most terrible condition. They all died, all 4. So 4 were normal, and 4 passed away. It's a mitochondria condition. She doesn't say what it is. And so in 10 years, she buried 4 kids. And you know, how absolutely awful that was. And to find what it was, you know, when you go through diagnoses can take years, and genetic samples. And she didn't say this, but I don't think she would have continued having babies. So that you have one, you think you're going to have one. Lots of when people have lots of kids and they have one child with a disability. But anyway, so there was all of that, and she buried 4 children. And she had 4 normal kids, a boy and 3 girls. And her son Yossi was engaged to get married, and then he drowned. And she talks about when they called her from the hospital, and she didn't go into details what happened, but how she's all the way there. She's saying to God, look, I accepted that 4 of my kids had this genetic condition, but 4 of them are meant to live. And so you can't let him die because he's in the category of who's meant to live. Anyway, he does pass away. And, you know, she talks about what she went through, and, you know, how she doesn't always feel so strong, but of what she's gone through, and accepting Hashem's will. She was saying one of the things or the other analogy she gave, she said, you know, this condition these kids had is they don't develop normally, but they grow normally. So one of her babies was very, very ill and was actually dying, but looked sort of normal. And she was holding the baby in a baby station, and it's called a baby changing station. And she's holding this little girl knowing that she's going to pass away. And she said, you know what, I want to change my baby. God, can't you give me another baby? And then she realized, you can't change your baby. This is the baby God gave you. There's no such thing as a baby changing station. This is the exact baby you meant to have. And it's the same thing, you know, if we are meant to be on the bus or not to be on the bus, or this is the baby we've got or we haven't. It's really about accepting Hashem's will and growing from it. It was quite a thing to listen to. It was just, she only recorded a few weeks ago with Rabbi Gorari, but it's really worth listening to it. But the reason I'm saying that is because, you know, we are going through very difficult times. And it's people like this that give us courage, and why we need to also have courage and fortitude, because we are blessed here. We have beautiful hospitality and a beautiful venue and other times as well. But we are blessed to understand and to have Torah values and to have a share like this where we can appreciate and learn and keep reminding ourselves that God runs the show. And so this is where we need to be leaders as well, not by telling people how to think, but role modeling that it's possible to be strong even when things aren't exactly the way you want them to be. That's how we strengthen each other, not by correcting people, but by being that role model ourselves. And, you know, when you finish listening to a share like that, first of all, it is so humbling, so humbling. I mean, 5 children out of 8 dying, it's just beyond. But she's able to talk and she's able to share her experience so that we can all get some strength from her. And it reminded me of someone else that I listened to this week. He is a father of 8 who lives in Hebron in Israel. And he was interviewed on Chabad.org. Hannah Weisberg, who runs a big section of it, they've started now. Actually, maybe it's been longer. I've only noticed now they do these podcasts. So she interviewed him because his son, I think his name is Ariel, please forgive me if it's wrong, but his son is a hostage. And his son was a security guard at the Nova Festival. And so she's asking him, you know, always the question, how do you cope? But also, if you understand where he lives, I've been there actually. There are mountains. So you've got Hebron, which is very Arab and very anti-Jewish. And Jews want to go there to pray at the cave of Machpelah because that's where our fathers are all buried, our fathers and our mothers. And it's a very unsafe place. There's been a few massacres there and whatever. And so there are people there that Dafka want to settle there, to settle the land, but also what he was saying is, I have to live here because we are the front line. If we are not here, Jews will never be able to come and daven at our fathers and our mothers. And so he's kept using the word shlichut. This is my purpose in life. Me and my family, and there are some other families, we are here so that other Jews can come. And I'm watching this man and I'm going, his son is right now is a hostage, doesn't know if he's alive or dead. And yet he's thinking about all the Jews. He's not moving or going anywhere because so when we go, we can visit Hebron, really, if you think about it. It was just incredible. And he was saying that, so she was saying, you know, how do you stay strong? And he said, we have to be strong. I've got 7 other children. And we have a family and we have to be strong and show our children, you know, how to cope with adversity. And he said, but my son is going to come back. And I want him to come back to a whole family. I don't want him to come back to a broken family. And I was just overawed that here you've got, and he said he got emotional, he wasn't inhuman. And he said, sometimes I drive in the car and I burst out crying. I'm not like this all the time. But most of the time my focus is, and I'll use my words now, on being a leader. I have to lead my family. These aren't his words. But I have to be strong for my son and for my other children. And I have to use whatever tools I have so that I can be there for others. And that's what I really want us all to think about here, that we all need to be there for each other and we need to be strong for each other. Doesn't mean we won't have sad moments and we won't have desperate moments, but they should just be moments. And then we need to bring in the Torah principles that we can do this, we can bear the discomfort, we've got Hashem to help us. We're all on shlichut, we're all as Jews are serving a very meaningful purpose. But this idea of being a role model to others, when I heard her, I thought she would never have chosen this in a million years. But she's using her story to give others courage. And when you do that, it gives you courage. So we need to do that as well. Each one of us in our own little ways to be strong during these times, because these times are very, very difficult. They are. And we can't pretend they're not, so we don't want to minimize them. But we can bear the discomfort, and we can find the tools to help us bear the discomfort, but to really think about being on a mission to help other people be stronger will help us as well, although that's secondary for the reason that we're doing that. So that's what I really took out of her talk and really felt very, very inspired by someone like her. So if I can find the link, I've got it here to send it to you. I'm going to put it on the share because it's the most incredible, if you can listen to it. She's strong. You don't feel but it's when you know that in our generation, someone like this lives. Because I've quoted before, there's the Klausenberger Rebbe, and he lost 11 children in the Holocaust. And when he moved to America and he started again, he used to go and visit people who ever lost a child. And he would just sit and not say a word. But he knew that when people saw him, they felt better. Which sounds a bit, but we can understand it. You kind of go, he's still walking, he's still getting up in the morning, he's still davening. It's a role model. I can also do it. But also you think, I've only lost one, right? He's lost 11. He never said any of these words, but that's how we all think, right? When we always compare ourselves to others. So here in our generation, here's a woman who's lost 5 children in the last 20 years. I don't know in how many years. And she's a role model. But we have our stuff. We've all gone through stuff and we go through stuff. But by using our MA tools and learning to cope with the discomfort and strengthening ourselves, the butterfly effect, that we can have an impact on the world, and we should feel strengthened that we do have a mission. We can be involved in Tikkun Olam. We can be involved in making the world better and stronger and resilient. And thank God we've got the tools and we've got each other. So we continue to strengthen each other.